once scientists realized that there was a correlation between the chlorine in the stratosphere and the decrease in ozone, it was immediately obvious to everybody the damaging effect if it were to go on and continue to increase the concentrations of chlorine in the stratosphere, it could become a serious problem over time. So there was a rapid response. The scientists who realized that there was this correlation made that information public early on, and then in 1977 there was a United Nations UN environmental program had a big meeting to talk about what needed to be done worldwide to control the chlorine getting into the stratosphere. Now, it's a rapid response, but on a worldwide scale, rapid, it doesn't mean like overnight. Actually, first the problem, people had to believe it. There had to be evidence, there had to be meetings, there had to be governments that plan meetings. And so finally in 1985, there was a something called the Vienna Convention in Vienna, Austria, and where governments got together and agreed that they were going to start removing CFCs from industrial processes and whatnot. And then in 1987, a very important document, the Montreal Protocol, was signed, and where international bodies agreed to stop using CFCs over time. And the meetings have continued to occur. There were more major meetings in the 1990s, even up as recently as 2007. Okay, this is an ongoing issue. The decisions are made, but everybody has to agree to it, and then the decisions on what is the path forward. And so as a result of all these meetings, the CFCs and spray cans were banned in 1978. That was the easiest thing to do and the cheapest thing to find replacements for spray cans. Just use a pump can instead of a spray can. And I actually remember this because that was back in the 1970s and late 60s when people had used a lot of hairspray, basically. And there were CFCs in those spray cans, and they were trying to convince the consumer to stop using those cans and to use pump cans. And eventually they were phased out, or pump containers. And then the CFCs were banned in foaming agents in the 1990s. And there was an agreement to stop all production of CFCs by the year 2000. So these things take time, but everybody agreed with the dangerousness, I guess that's the word, of the situation and the potential damage to the environment and then to living things due to removing ozone essentially from the stratosphere. So it was everybody agrees that it's a good thing to stop using CFCs. And so you can see that this is a graph of CFC production over time. They were first, invented in the 1950s, and then there was a huge market demand for CFCs. It's by this time $1 billion business, because all of the new air conditioners that are now being purchased and air conditioning units in cars, used to be cars didn't have air conditioners. Suddenly there's a huge demand for CFCs because they were such a great refrigerant. And then the first ozone depletion was reported in 1974, and so you see kind of a plateau here. And then at this point in time, the governments were starting to talk about, in the 1980s, late 70s and 80s, they're going to stop making CFCs. And so there's this spike in CFC production because they knew that there's going to be this major agreement where they're going to phase CFCs out and they're no longer going to be able to make them. So there was a stockpiling that was done because they knew, the people in the industry knew that there's going to be a demand because it was going to take time to phase out all those air conditioning units that were dependent and engineered to use these CFCs. So then the Montreal Protocol was a major document signed in 1987, and then you can see the decline in the production because then it was illegal to continue to produce CFCs beyond that point in time. Okay, well, so it's illegal for the countries that agreed to participate, but as it turns out, the developing countries, didn't quite sign on early on. And you wonder why. I mean, if it's a problem for the well-being of the health and safety of the people and plants to have the ozone depleted, why wouldn't developing countries want to still produce CFCs? Well, you have to understand the economies. And in the developed world, there was money, already everybody needed refrigeration. The economy was based on refrigeration, just a matter of making new refrigerants and designing a refrigerator slightly different and air conditioners to use the new refrigerant. But in developing countries, they're dependent on older technology, and they couldn't afford to continue to grow their economies and then at the same time invest a lot of money in developing new technologies. So there's a lag between the developing countries and the developed countries in producing CFCs. And as it actually turned out, in the developing countries, they're using the older technology. They need to still have the CFCs. The CFCs were no longer in production, so they had to make an agreement with the developing nations to allow the developed nations to allow the developing nations a little lag time, so they could continue to produce CFCs, whereas the developed countries had to stop. Okay, and so what that caused then was sort of a black market, because in the developed countries they stopped making CFCs, so CFCs became very expensive. So if you needed to have your refrigeration unit or your car air conditioner serviced, then the CFCs were more expensive. And so there was a black market, and actually China was the biggest contributor to black market CFCs, as well as other developing nations, because people were looking for a cheap source of CFCs because they were no longer available.